The wind in Juneau sliced like a shard of ice, bitter enough to sting the skin and blur the vision of anyone unprepared. But Corporal Ethan Reynolds, a sentinel of the 3rd Infantry Regiment, the old guard, stood resolute before the sprawling summit hall. His polished boots were anchored to the frost-dusted granite. His M14 rifle a stark vertical line against the bruised, overcast sky of southeast Alaska. Camera shutters snapped like gunfire, diplomats murmured in hushed tones, and then the Russian convoy arrived, sleek, black, and unrelenting, like a storm rolling off the Gastineau Channel. Vladimir Putin emerged, his gaze cutting through the gathered crowd, pinning Ethan with a look that carried the weight of a command. "Clear him," Putin said, his voice low and edged with frost, gesturing at the tomb guard as if he were an obstacle to be swept aside. The crowd froze, anticipation crackling in the air, waiting for Ethan to yield. But what no one, not the journalists, not the diplomats, not even Putin, could know was that this sentinel had faced far worse than a president's order. The scars he bore from Kandahar, etched deep in body and soul, were about to transform a routine diplomatic photo op into a moment that would reverberate across nations. The Juneau morning was merciless, the kind of cold that clawed into your marrow and made every breath a battle. A thick mist curled off the channel, veiling the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Tongass National Forest in an eerie haze. Summit Hall loomed like a citadel of glass and iron, its reflective walls catching the weak Arctic light. American and Russian flags hung heavy above the entrance, weighed down by the damp air. Inside, diplomats adjusted their ties and polished their talking points. Reporters fine-tuned their equipment, and security teams moved with lethal precision, conducting final sweeps of the corridors. Outside, on the icy expanse of Glacier Plaza, Corporal Ethan Reynolds stood as still as stone, a lone sentinel in the chaos of the U.S.-Russia summit. At 34, Ethan was a veteran of Afghanistan, where the crucible of war had forged him into something unyielding. He'd lost his best friend, Corporal Danny Walsh, in a brutal ambush outside Kandahar. Danny, whose quick wit could lighten even the darkest moments, whose name was never carved into a monument but lived in Ethan's every disciplined step. That loss had driven him to the old guard, to the relentless training of a tomb guard, where every movement was a tribute to those who never came home. 21 steps, 21 seconds of pause, a perfect turn and absolute silence. These were the tenets of his post, carried from Arlington's hallowed grounds to this frozen plaza in Juneau, where he'd been sent to stand as an honor guard for the summit. Ethan's eyes, sharp and unyielding, stared past the flurry of activity, past the cameras, past the murmurs, to a distant point only he could see. The plaza buzzed with controlled tension. Armored SUVs rolled in, tires grinding against the ice-slick stone. Reporters jostled for angles, their flashes cutting through the mist like beacons. At the crowd's edge, Mary Kalmakoff, a weathered woman of 62 with silver hair tucked under a thick wool scarf, spoke in low tones to Rachel Torres, a 29-year-old NBC reporter with a knack for spotting the story beneath the surface. Mary's voice carried the grit of a lifetime on the remote Kodiak Island. "We've got Russian heritage here," she said, nodding toward the golden domes of a distant Orthodox church across the channel. "But heritage doesn't mean loyalty. Not in times like these." Rachel scribbled notes, her instincts prickling. The air felt charged, like the prelude to a storm far bigger than diplomatic posturing. She wasn't wrong. The atmosphere shifted as the Russian delegation arrived, a convoy of armored vehicles, cold and precise as the Bering Sea, pulling up with surgical efficiency. Doors opened, and out stepped Vladimir Putin, his face a mask of calculated calm. He smoothed the cuffs of his tailored black suit, his eyes scanning the plaza like a predator assessing its terrain. His security team, 6 men in dark coats, their gazes hard as obsidian, fanned out around him. Russian camera crews angled for the perfect shot. Putin framed against Summit Hall's entrance, with its American flags and the solitary figure of Ethan standing guard. To the Russians, Ethan was an inconvenience, a soldier in a flawless uniform standing precisely where they didn't want him. Putin paused mid-plaza, his eyes locking onto Ethan with the intensity of a man unaccustomed to obstacles. "Why is he there?" he asked in English, his voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through the wind. An aide, a lean figure with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned in and whispered in Russian. Putin's lips curled, not quite a smile. "Remove him from the frame," he said, louder now, waving a hand toward Ethan. "I want the building, not the statue." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. American reporters exchanged glances, sensing a spark that could ignite a story. Rachel raised her camera, her pulse racing. This was no ordinary exchange. One of Putin's security team, a towering man with a shaved head and a jagged scar cutting across his left cheek, stepped forward. His boots clicked on the icy stone as he approached the velvet rope marking Ethan's post. "Soldier," he said, his English thick and guttural, "step aside. We need this space." Ethan didn't flinch. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon, his body a monument to discipline. The guard hesitated, glancing back at Putin, who raised an eyebrow, clearly unused to resistance. The crowd grew silent, the air thick with tension. Rachel's lens zoomed in, capturing the faint clench of the Russian guard's jaw. From the plaza's edge, Colonel Elizabeth Liz Carter emerged, her uniform pristine, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. At 52, she was a seasoned commander who'd earned her stripes in the deserts of Iraq and the halls of the Pentagon. Her career built on the ironclad traditions of the old guard. She'd been overseeing the honor guard detail for the summit, and the sight of a foreign security team encroaching on her sentinel's post set her jaw tight. She strode forward, her boots ringing with authority, and planted herself between the Russian guard and Ethan. "Sir," she said, her voice calm but hard as the granite beneath her feet. "This is an active honor guard post under U.S. Army jurisdiction. The sentinel does not move without my orders." The Russian guard froze, his hand hovering near the rope. He glanced back at Putin, who watched with a mix of curiosity and irritation. "Is this how you conduct yourselves here?" Putin called out, his voice carrying across the plaza like a blade. "A soldier who can't step aside for a simple photograph?" Liz didn't waver. "This soldier represents the fallen of our nation," she said, her words measured but unyielding. "His post is sacred. You do well to honor it." The crowd was deathly silent now, every camera trained on the standoff. Rachel's heart hammered as she recorded, knowing this was the kind of moment that could redefine headlines. Putin took a step closer, crossing an invisible boundary that even seasoned diplomats knew to respect. He stopped just beyond the rope, his eyes boring into Ethan's. "What's your name, soldier?" he asked, his tone deceptively light, but laced with a challenge. Ethan remained silent, his face an unreadable mask. Putin leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You don't speak, or you don't think I'm worth your time?" Still, Ethan didn't move. Putin straightened, his expression inscrutable, as the mist swirled thicker around the plaza, cloaking the scene in an almost otherworldly tension. "Fine," Putin said, his voice a low growl as he turned to his aide, a wiry man with wire-rimmed glasses now fogged by the icy Juneau air. "Get the shot from another angle, but make it quick." The tension didn't break. It coiled tighter, like a steel cable stretched to its limit. The Russian guard, his scarred face taut with uncertainty, lingered at the velvet rope, his boots scuffing the frost-dusted granite of Glacier Plaza. Colonel Liz Carter, now 52, stood unmoved, her silver hair gleaming under the weak Arctic light, her presence an impenetrable wall of authority. From the crowd, a junior diplomat, a young woman in a navy coat, whispered to a colleague, "This is no accident. They're probing our resolve." Rachel Torres, 29, her NBC press badge swinging as she adjusted her camera, captured every detail. The faint twitch in Putin's jaw, the unyielding rigidity of Ethan's shoulders, the way Liz's hand rested lightly on her hip, fingers brushing the edge of her service ribbon as if ready to escalate. The plaza felt like a frozen stage, and Corporal Ethan Reynolds, 34, was its unshakable center, his M14 rifle a silent testament against the mist-shrouded peaks of the Tongass National Forest. Then, something shifted. Putin raised a hand, the gesture sharp and deliberate, signaling his security team to halt. He turned back to Ethan, his eyes narrowing as if trying to decipher an ancient script carved in stone. "You've got discipline," he said, almost to himself, his voice carrying a grudging respect. "I understand that." He gestured to his security chief, the scarred man, who nodded curtly. "Let him be." But the moment wasn't over. Putin remained just beyond the rope, his dark suit stark against the icy plaza, watching Ethan with a gaze that hovered between curiosity and challenge. The crowd held its breath, the air thick with the sense that something monumental was unfolding. Liz stepped forward again, her boots echoing with precision on the granite. "Corporal Reynolds," she said, her voice formal but laced with a rare warmth that cut through the biting wind. "You may speak if you choose." It was an unprecedented break from protocol, a moment no sentinel could have anticipated. Ethan's head turned slightly, just enough to meet Putin's gaze. His eyes, hardened by the crucible of Kandahar, burned with quiet defiance. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, each word hewn from granite. "This post honors the fallen, sir. It doesn't move for a photograph." The words struck like a thunderclap. The crowd went still, the only sound the faint hum of Rachel's camera and the distant cry of a gull over the Gastineau Channel. Putin's eyes narrowed, but there was no anger in them, only a flicker of recalculation, as if he were reassessing the man before him. Rachel's fingers trembled as she uploaded the clip to X, her caption stark and powerful. U.S. Sentinel holds ground in Juneau. Within minutes, the post ignited, comments flooding in from across the globe. "That's our soldier. This is what honor looks like." He didn't flinch. Putin stood motionless, hands clasped behind his back, his face an unreadable mask. Then, slowly, he raised his right hand to his temple in a brief, unmistakable salute. It wasn't crisp or formal, but it was undeniable, a gesture from a man who rarely yielded. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd, reporters and diplomats exchanging stunned glances. Rachel's lens zoomed in, capturing the moment in crisp detail. The faint curl of Putin's lips, the steely pride in Liz's eyes, the unwavering posture of Ethan. The Russian security team hesitated, their movements faltering as they stepped back, unsure how to process the exchange. Putin turned away without another word, striding towards Summit Hall's towering glass entrance, his team falling in behind him like shadows. The cameras followed, but the real story remained on the plaza, where Ethan returned to his position, his posture unchanged, his gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the mist. The summit would continue. Diplomats would trade carefully crafted words, agreements would be drafted, and headlines would churn. But for those who witnessed it, the moment belonged to the sentinel who hadn't moved. As the day wore on, Glacier Plaza emptied, the reporters and dignitaries filing into Summit Hall. Rachel lingered, her phone buzzing incessantly with notifications as her video went viral, racking up millions of views. She approached Mary Kalmakoff, now 62, whose weathered face bore the marks of a life spent on the windswept shores of Kodiak Island. Mary had watched the entire scene unfold, her wool scarf pulled tight against the biting wind. "That soldier," she said, her voice quiet but firm as she nodded toward Ethan. "He's like the mountains out there, stands tall no matter who comes." Rachel nodded, her mind already racing with the lead for her next report. A single soldier's stand redefines a summit. Outside, the air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. Inside Summit Hall, the summit droned on with polished speeches and diplomatic posturing. But the plaza's moment lingered like a pulse. Ethan's shift ended at 1,400 hours, right on schedule. The relief sentinel arrived, their steps synchronized in a flawless mirror of tradition. Ethan marched off the plaza with the same precision he'd brought to it, his boots echoing in the quiet, the sound swallowed by the mist rolling in from the channel. In the guard room, a narrow space tucked beneath Summit Hall's polished exterior, Ethan removed his ceremonial uniform with ritual care. The white gloves came off first, folded with precision and placed on a bench. The polished boots followed, set neatly beside his locker. He reached inside and pulled out a small, military-issue metal case, its edges worn from years of handling. Inside lay a faded dog tag, not his own, but Danny Walsh's, his friend lost in a Kandahar ambush years ago. The tag's edges were smooth from countless nights held in Ethan's hand, a silent tether to a promise he'd made to never forget. A voice broke the silence. "Hell of a day, Hawk," said Corporal Marcus Tate, a 26-year-old sentinel with 3 years in the old guard. His eyes gleamed with a mix of awe and mischief. Ethan turned, his expression as unreadable as ever. "You spoke," Marcus said, a grin tugging at his lips. "On post, in front of a world leader. Didn't think you had that in you." Ethan allowed a faint smile, the kind that barely touched his eyes. "I was authorized," he said, his voice dry as the desert where he'd last seen Danny. Marcus laughed, shaking his head. "Authorized or not, you just wrote yourself into the history books." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. The barracks knew him as the quiet one, the sentinel who carried his post like it was woven into his bones. He changed into civilian clothes, a worn leather jacket and jeans, but his posture remained unyielding, shoulders square, chin lifted. As he stepped toward the door, a junior officer appeared, holding a sealed envelope. "From Colonel Carter," the officer said, his voice hushed with respect. Ethan took it without a word, waiting until the officer left to open it. Inside was a single card, no crest or signature, just 5 words in Carter's precise handwriting. "You stood for us all." He folded the card and slipped it into the metal case beside Danny's dog tag. Some things were meant to be carried, not displayed. Outside, Juneau was sinking into dusk, the mountains a jagged silhouette against the fading light. The summit's outcomes would be debated on cable news, dissected on X, but Ethan was already moving forward, his steps steady, his silence a language of its own. The world had seen him today, not as a statue or a backdrop, but as a man who'd held his ground when it mattered most. The next morning, Ethan was back at his post, the same spot before Summit Hall's entrance. The plaza was quieter now, the initial frenzy of the summit's opening day replaced by the steady hum of diplomacy. Reporters still lingered, their cameras occasionally swinging toward him, but Ethan didn't notice. His eyes were fixed ahead, his movements precise, his silence unbroken. Rachel Torres stood at the crowd's edge, her phone still buzzing with reactions to her viral video, now trending globally. She watched Ethan for a moment, then turned to Mary Kalmakoff, who'd returned to witness the summit's second day, her scarf now damp from the morning mist. "He's still there," Rachel said, almost to herself, her voice tinged with awe. Mary nodded, her gaze fixed on Ethan. "Some things don't move," she said, her words carrying the weight of a lifetime on Alaska's unforgiving shores. "And that's why they endure." Inside Summit Hall, Putin sat at a polished mahogany table, his face as inscrutable as ever. He didn't speak of the incident, but one of his aides later confided to a reporter that he'd asked about the Sentinels, their training, their purpose, their unyielding discipline. He was curious, the aide said, but he didn't say why. The summit rolled on, its discussions cloaked in diplomatic jargon, but the image that lingered for those who'd been there wasn't the handshakes or the signed agreements. It was the soldier in the flawless uniform, the man who'd stood still when the world demanded he move, the sentinel who'd reminded everyone that some things, honor, duty, sacrifice, are bigger than a photograph. But the story didn't end there. As the summit progressed, whispers began to circulate among the press corps. A Russian journalist, emboldened by the Plaza incident, approached Rachel with a tip. Putin's team had requested a private meeting with U.S. military officials to discuss the old guard's training protocols. The request was denied, but the fact that it had been made at all spoke volumes. Ethan's stand had rippled beyond the plaza, planting a seed of respect, or perhaps unease, in the Russian delegation. Back at the barracks, Ethan prepared for his next shift, his routine unchanged. But the weight of the previous day lingered. Marcus, still buzzing with excitement, pressed him again. You know you're a legend now, right? They're calling you the unmoving sentinel on X. Ethan shrugged, his fingers brushing the metal case in his locker. Legends don't stand posts, he said quietly. Sentinels do. As the summit drew to a close, Rachel filed her final report, weaving together the Plaza standoff with interviews from Mary, local Juneau residents, and even a retired Alaskan National Guard officer who'd seen the video. Her story, published on NBC's website, was picked up globally, translated into dozens of languages. The headline read, "One soldier, one moment, one stand." In Juneau, the mist never lifted, but the memory of Ethan's defiance burned bright, a beacon in the cold, a reminder that some things, rooted in duty and forged in loss, could never be moved.